This section is reserved for Diamond Elite guests only. The words slice through the sound of champagne glasses clinking and soft violin music drifting across the deck. A 13-year-old black boy stands frozen near the railing, his hand clutching a small, insulated medical pouch, his eyes searching the woman's face for something. Understanding, compassion, anything human. Behind him, the Mediterranean glows like liquid gold under the setting sun. The Sea of Roses, a floating palace of wealth and privilege, cuts through the water with silent arrogance. But inside that boy's chest, something far more dangerous than the ocean is stirring, and the woman standing in front of him, smiling, polished, powerful, has no idea she just lit a fuse that will burn through every rule on this ship. The boarding process for the Sea of Roses was unlike anything most people had experienced. This wasn't a typical cruise liner with screaming children and buffet lines. This was floating aristocracy, a 7-deck vessel that catered exclusively to those who lived beyond the reach of ordinary concern. The embarkation lounge in Barcelona gleamed with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and staff who moved with the kind of practiced invisibility reserved for those who served the truly wealthy. Champagne flutes were offered at check-in. Luggage vanished without a word. Everything was designed to make guests feel untouchable, unaccountable, elevated. David Carter stood near the Diamond Elite boarding lane with his son, Elijah, at his side. David was 42, tall with the kind of presence that didn't demand attention but commanded it anyway. He wore a simple navy blazer over a white shirt. No tie, no flash, just quiet confidence. His leather messenger bag hung across his chest, and inside it, secured in a temperature-controlled pouch, was a single vial of medication that meant the difference between life and death for his son. Elijah was 13, lean and sharp-eyed, with a curious intelligence that made him seem older than his years. He clutched a tablet in one hand and a small backpack in the other, his expression a mix of excitement and caution. He'd been on planes before, been through TSA screenings, been stared at in airports, been questioned. He knew the drill. But this was different. This was supposed to be a celebration. David had saved for 2 years to book this trip. It wasn't about luxury for luxury's sake. It was about giving Elijah something normal, something joyful, something that wasn't defined by hospital visits and clinical trials. The boy had been part of an experimental treatment program for a rare neurological condition since he was 9. The medication, coded as NX-47, was developed under a partnership between the National Institutes of Health and a private pharmaceutical consortium. It wasn't commercially available. It wasn't labeled with a standard prescription sticker. It existed in a legal gray zone that required federal clearance, chain of custody documentation, and approval from multiple agencies just to transport across state lines. David had all of it. He always did. As they moved through the boarding gate, a young woman in a crisp white uniform with gold epaulets stepped forward. Her name tag read, Rebecca Hollis, Guest Services Coordinator. She was 29, blonde, with the kind of smile that had been perfected in hospitality training seminars. Polished, professional, practiced. "Welcome aboard the Sea of Roses," she said warmly, extending a hand toward David. "May I see your boarding passes?" David handed them over. She scanned them quickly. Then her eyes flicked to Elijah. "And you must be our youngest Diamond Elite guest this voyage," she said brightly. "How exciting." Elijah offered a polite smile, but said nothing. He'd learned early that enthusiasm from strangers often came with conditions. Rebecca glanced at the messenger bag across David's chest. Her smile didn't falter, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Sir, all carry-on items need to be inspected before boarding. It's standard protocol." David nodded. "Of course. I have medical supplies inside. Time-sensitive medication for my son. I have all the necessary documentation." Rebecca's expression remained neutral, but her posture straightened slightly. "Medical supplies?" "Yes," David said calmly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim folder. Inside were letters from Elijah's physicians, copies of the NIH clinical trial approval, a notarized transport permit, and even a contact number for the program's lead researcher. He handed it to her without hesitation. Rebecca skimmed the documents, her eyes moving quickly over words she didn't fully understand. Next 47, experimental compound, federal oversight, chain of custody required. She looked up at David, then at Elijah, then back at the papers. This isn't labeled, she said carefully. There's no pharmacy sticker. David's jaw tightened just slightly, but his voice remained even. It's not a commercial medication. It's part of a federally monitored clinical trial. The documentation explains the protocol. Rebecca hesitated. She'd been trained to flag irregularities, to escalate concerns, to protect the ship and its guests from liability. Unlabeled liquids, unmarked containers, vague explanations. These were red flags in her mental checklist, but the paperwork looked official, too official. She glanced toward the security desk, where two crew members in dark uniforms stood watching. One of them, a woman in her mid-30s with short brown hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, caught Rebecca's eye. Her name was Claire Donovan, head of onboard security. Rebecca waved her over. "Excuse me for just a moment," Rebecca said to David, offering another rehearsed smile. "I just need to confirm something with my supervisor." David exhaled slowly. He'd been through this before. Airports, train stations, hotels, every time the same pattern. Someone saw something they didn't understand, and instead of asking, they escalated. He glanced down at Elijah, who was watching the exchange with quiet tension. "It's okay," David whispered. "We've done this before." Elijah nodded, but his fingers gripped the tablet a little tighter. Claire approached with the kind of stride that suggested she was used to making decisions quickly and without apology. She took the folder from Rebecca, scanned it with sharp, assessing eyes, then looked at David. "This is your son's medication?" "Yes," David replied. "And you're transporting it yourself?" "Yes. It requires temperature control and precise timing. I'm the only authorized handler." Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why isn't it in a standard pharmacy container?" David kept his voice calm, measured. "Because it's not a standard medication. It's part of a clinical trial under NIH oversight. The documentation explains everything." Claire flipped through the pages again, then handed the folder back to Rebecca. "I'll need to inspect the vial," she said flatly. David's stomach tightened, but he nodded. "I can show it to you, but it can't be removed from the temperature-controlled pouch for more than 60 seconds. If it destabilizes, it becomes ineffective." Claire raised an eyebrow. "That's specific." "That's the protocol," David said. He opened the messenger bag carefully, revealing the insulated pouch. Inside, nestled between gel cooling packs, was a small glass vial filled with a clear liquid. No label, no branding, just a handwritten code on a piece of medical tape. NX47EC, dose 3. Claire stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked at David. "This could be anything." David's voice dropped, quiet but firm. "It's my son's life." The two locked eyes. For a moment, the noise of the boarding lounge faded. The clinking glasses, the murmured conversations, the hum of wealth and privilege, it all dissolved into a single point of tension. Claire exhaled, then stepped back. "Fine, but I'm making a note of this. If there's any issue during the voyage, this will be flagged." David nodded. "Understood." Rebecca forced another smile. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Carter. Enjoy your voyage." David took Elijah's hand and walked toward the gangway. As they stepped onto the ship, the boy looked up at his father. "Why do they always do that?" he asked softly. David didn't answer right away. He just squeezed his son's hand and kept walking. Because some questions didn't have good answers. They only had truth. The Sea of Roses was a marvel of modern engineering and old-world opulence. The main atrium soared 3 decks high, crowned with a glass dome that filtered Mediterranean sunlight into soft golden beams. A grand staircase spiraled upward, lined with polished brass railings and velvet ropes. Artwork adorned the walls, originals, not prints, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine and money. David and Elijah were escorted to their suite on Deck 9, the Diamond Elite level. The suite was more like a small apartment, a bedroom with a king-sized bed, A separate living area with a leather sofa and flat-screen TV, a private balcony overlooking the sea, and a marble bathroom with a rainfall shower. Elijah dropped his backpack and ran to the balcony. "Dad, look!" David joined him, and together they watched as the ship began to pull away from the dock. The city of Barcelona stretched out behind them, a tapestry of terracotta roofs and distant mountains. The engines hummed beneath their feet, steady and powerful. "This is amazing," Elijah said, his voice filled with rare, unguarded joy. David smiled. "Yeah, buddy, it is." But even as he said it, his mind was elsewhere. He glanced at his watch. 4:47 p.m. local time. Elijah's next dose was scheduled for 8 p.m. He had just over 3 hours. Plenty of time. He unpacked the insulated pouch, placed it in the suite's mini-fridge to maintain temperature stability, and set an alarm on his phone. Everything was under control, for now. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting the sea in shades of amber and violet, David stood on the balcony and allowed himself one moment of peace. One moment to believe that this trip would be different, that for once they could just be a father and son on vacation. But deep in the ship's lower decks, in a small office marked Security, Claire Donovan sat at her desk, staring at a digital log entry she'd just made. Passenger, David Carter, Suite 914. Flagged item, unlabeled medical vial. No visible pharmacy certification. Declared as experimental compound. Documentation provided but unverified. Monitor closely. She clicked save, leaned back in her chair, and exhaled. She'd done her job. She'd followed protocol. And if something went wrong, she'd be covered. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in less than 18 hours, that single log entry would become the spark that set everything ablaze. The first full day aboard the Sea of Roses began with sunlight pouring through the balcony doors of Suite 914. Elijah woke to the sound of waves and the distant hum of the ship's engines. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he saw the ocean stretching endlessly beyond the glass, and he smiled. David was already awake, sitting at the small desk with his laptop open. He glanced over as Elijah stirred. "Morning, champ. Sleep okay?" Elijah nodded, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, this bed is like sleeping on a cloud." David chuckled. "Good. We've got a big day ahead. Breakfast, then the pool deck. Sound good?" "Sounds perfect," Elijah said, swinging his legs out of bed. David had already checked Elijah's vitals that morning. Heart rate, temperature, neurological response. Everything was stable. The dose administered last night at 8 p.m. had worked perfectly. The next one wasn't due until 8 a.m. the following day, giving them a full 24 hours of freedom. They could breathe. They could be normal. After breakfast in the Diamond Elite dining room, a lavish spread of fresh fruit, pastries, omelets made to order, and fresh squeezed juice, they made their way to the pool deck. The Sea of Roses had 2 pool areas, one for general passengers on Deck 5, and another more exclusive space on Deck 10, reserved for Diamond Elite guests. The upper pool was smaller, quieter, surrounded by private cabanas and staffed by attendants who anticipated needs before they were spoken. Elijah wore a blue polo shirt and swim trunks, his backpack slung over one shoulder. David carried a beach bag with sunscreen, towels, and the insulated pouch. He never let it out of his sight. Not ever. They found 2 lounge chairs near the railing, overlooking the sea. The water below was impossibly blue, the kind of blue that didn't seem real. Elijah set his tablet on the table beside him and leaned back, soaking in the sun. "This is nice," he said softly. David smiled. "Yeah, it is. For a while, they just existed. No appointments, no doctors, no tests. Just father and son together, at peace. But peace on the Sea of Roses was fragile. Rebecca Hollis moved through the Diamond Elite pool deck with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew her role well. She greeted guests by name, refilled drinks before they were asked, and ensured that everything ran smoothly. She was good at her job. She prided herself on it. But something had been nagging at her since yesterday. The man in Suite 914, the unlabeled vial, the federal documents. It all felt off. Not dangerous necessarily, but irregular. And irregularities made her uncomfortable. She'd been trained to trust her instincts, to flag concerns, to escalate when necessary. And this morning, as she watched David Carter sitting near the railing with his son, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden. She approached their lounge chairs with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. I hope you're both enjoying the facilities." David looked up. "We are. Thank you." Rebecca's eyes flicked briefly to the beach bag beside his chair. "Can I get you anything? A drink? Fresh towels?" "We're fine for now," David said evenly. Rebecca nodded, but she didn't leave. Instead, she glanced at Elijah, who was scrolling through something on his tablet. "Is your son feeling well?" she asked, her tone light but pointed. David's jaw tightened slightly. "He's fine. Why do you ask?" Rebecca's smile didn't waver. "Oh, no reason. I just know you mentioned he has a medical condition. I wanted to make sure everything is comfortable for him." David studied her for a beat, then replied calmly, "He's comfortable. Thank you." Rebecca nodded again, then turned and walked back toward the service bar. But as she moved, she pulled a small radio from her belt and keyed it quietly. "Claire, it's Rebecca. Can you meet me by the upper deck bar? I want to discuss something." A moment later, Claire Donovan's voice crackled through. "Copy. On my way." Elijah looked at his father. "She's watching us, isn't she?" David exhaled slowly. "Yeah, she is." "Why?" "Because people don't like what they don't understand," David said quietly, and instead of asking, they assume. Elijah frowned. "That's not fair." "No," David agreed. "It's not." Minutes later, Rebecca stood near the bar with Claire, speaking in low tones. "I just think we should keep an eye on them," Rebecca said. "The boy looks fine now, but if that medication is as critical as the father claims, what happens if something goes wrong? We're in the middle of the Mediterranean. We're hours from any hospital." Claire crossed her arms. "What are you suggesting?" Rebecca hesitated. "I'm suggesting we verify that vial. Make sure it's actually what he says it is." Claire raised an eyebrow. "We already inspected it at boarding." "We looked at it," Rebecca corrected. "We didn't verify it." "For all we know, it could be anything," Claire frowned. "You think he's lying?" "I think he's being evasive," Rebecca said carefully. "And I think if something happens to that boy on this ship, we're liable." Claire was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll request a secondary inspection, but I'll need the captain's approval first." Rebecca felt a small surge of relief. "Thank you." What neither of them realized was that their conversation had been overheard. A young woman in her early 20s, sitting at a nearby cabana with oversized sunglasses and a phone in her hand, had caught every word. Her name was Maya Torres, a travel influencer with over 800,000 followers. She'd boarded the Sea of Roses on a complimentary press pass, documenting the voyage for her audience. And she'd just stumbled onto something far more interesting than spa treatments and sunset cocktails. By mid-afternoon, the pool deck had filled with guests. Families lounged in cabanas. Couples sipped champagne. Children splashed in the shallow end. Elijah had gone into the pool, swimming slow, easy laps while David watched from his chair. The boy moved gracefully through the water, his strokes smooth and controlled. David's phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Lena Vasquez, the lead researcher on Elijah's clinical trial. "Just checking in. How's the voyage going? Any issues with the medication?" David typed back quickly. "All good so far. Next dose scheduled for tomorrow morning. E is doing great." A moment later, another message. "Good. Stay vigilant. You know how sensitive NX-47 is to environmental changes. If anything feels off, don't hesitate to contact me." David replied with a thumbs-up emoji, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. He trusted Dr. Vasquez. She'd been with them since the beginning, guiding them through the trial with patience and precision. But even her reassurances couldn't quiet the low hum of anxiety that never fully left him. At 4:30 p.m., Claire Donovan stood outside the captain's quarters on Deck 12. She knocked twice, then entered when a voice called out. Captain Raymond Collier was in his late 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, a man who'd spent 30 years at sea and had seen just about everything. He looked up from a navigation report as Claire stepped in. "What is it, Donovan?" Claire handed him a printed summary of the incident from boarding. We have a passenger in Suite 914 traveling with an unlabeled medical vial. Claims it's part of a federal clinical trial. Documentation looks legitimate, but the guest services coordinator is concerned about liability. Captain Collier scanned the report, his expression unreadable. Has the passenger caused any trouble? No, sir, he's been cooperative. But the vial isn't labeled, and we have no way to verify its contents. Collier leaned back in his chair. And you want to inspect it again? Yes, sir, just to be safe. The captain was quiet for a moment, then sighed. All right, but do it discreetly. I don't want this turning into a scene. If the man has proper documentation, we respect that. If not, we secure the item and notify authorities at the next port. Understood? Understood, sir. Claire left the office, her mind already calculating the next steps. She didn't want to escalate. She didn't want conflict, but she also didn't want to be the one who ignored a red flag and paid the price later. That evening, as the sun set over the Mediterranean, David and Elijah dressed for dinner. The formal dining room on Deck 8 was a spectacle of chandeliers, white linens, and live violin music. They were seated at a table near the window, overlooking the darkening sea. Elijah wore a button-down shirt, and David had opted for a blazer. For a few hours, they were just like everyone else, wealthy, privileged, unburdened. But as the first course arrived, a delicate seafood appetizer, David noticed Rebecca Hollis standing near the entrance, speaking quietly with Claire Donovan. Both women glanced in his direction. David's stomach tightened. He set down his fork and met Rebecca's gaze across the room. She smiled, polite and professional, then turned away. But the damage was done. Elijah noticed the shift in his father's posture. Dad? David forced a smile. It's fine, buddy. Let's just enjoy dinner. But deep down, he knew something was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't be quiet. Maya Torres sat 3 tables away, her phone angled discreetly beneath the table. She'd been recording snippets of the voyage all day, but now she focused her lens on the man and boy by the window. She didn't know their story yet, but she knew tension when she saw it. And she knew her audience loved drama. She tapped the record button and whispered into the mic. Day 2 on the Sea of Roses and something's brewing. Stay tuned. The video uploaded instantly. Within minutes, it had 12,000 views. By the time dessert was served, it had reached 50,000. And by the time David and Elijah returned to their suite that night, the comment section was already ablaze with speculation. Who is that man? Why is security watching him? This feels like something bigger. They had no idea how right they were. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a story about medication or protocol. This is about power, perception, and what happens when someone decides you don't belong. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been profiled or judged because of how you looked? Let's talk about it. And if this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me, hit that subscribe button. This is only the beginning. The knock came at 9:47 a.m. on the second day. David was preparing Elijah's medication when the sharp rap echoed through Suite 914. He paused, syringe in hand, and glanced toward the door. Elijah sat on the edge of the bed, already changed and ready for the day. You expecting someone? The boy asked. No, David said quietly. He set the syringe down carefully, walked to the door, and opened it. Rebecca Hollis stood in the hallway, flanked by Claire Donovan and a third crew member, a tall man in a dark uniform with a security badge clipped to his belt. Rebecca's smile was tight, rehearsed. Good morning, Mr. Carter. I'm sorry to disturb you, but we need to conduct a follow-up inspection of the medical item you declared at boarding. David's expression didn't change. We already went through this. I understand, Claire said, stepping forward. But given the nature of the item and our liability protocols, we need to verify its contents more thoroughly. It's standard procedure for unlabeled substances. David's jaw tightened. It's not a substance. It's medication. And I've provided all the necessary documentation. We're not questioning your documentation, Rebecca said quickly. We just need to confirm that what's in the vial matches what's described in the paperwork. For everyone's safety. David stared at her for a long moment. He could feel Elijah's eyes on him from across the room. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down like a hand on his chest. You're not taking it, he said evenly. Claire's expression hardened. Mr. Carter, we're not asking for permission. This is a security matter. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to involve the captain and potentially law enforcement at the next port. David's voice dropped, quiet but laced with steel. If you touch that medication, you're violating federal protocol. That vial is under NIH oversight, and tampering with it is a federal offense. Rebecca blinked. Sir, we're not tampering. We're inspecting. You're overstepping, David replied. And if something happens to my son because you destroyed his only dose, you won't just lose your job. You'll face criminal charges. The hallway went silent. Claire exchanged a glance with the security officer, then turned back to David. We're not trying to escalate this, Mr. Carter, but we have a responsibility to the other passengers. And I have a responsibility to my son, David shot back. One that supersedes your discomfort. Rebecca's face flushed slightly. This isn't about discomfort. It's about safety. No, David said, his voice sharp now. It's about control. You don't like that I have something you can't regulate, so you're inventing reasons to take it. Claire stepped forward, her tone colder now. Mr. Carter, I'm going to ask you one more time. Hand over the vial, or we will be forced to— Forced to what? David interrupted. Arrest me? For carrying my son's prescribed medication? Go ahead. But when you do, make sure you document everything, because the lawsuit that follows will be historic. Rebecca's breath caught. The security officer shifted uncomfortably. Claire's expression remained hard, but something flickered behind her eyes. Doubt. David didn't move. He stood in the doorway like a wall, immovable, unshakable. You have two options, he said quietly. You can walk away right now, or you can escalate this and find out exactly how much authority I actually have. Your choice. For 5 seconds, no one spoke. Then Claire exhaled sharply, turned to Rebecca and said, Let's go. Rebecca's eyes widened. But now, Claire snapped. The 3 crew members turned and walked down the hallway. David watched them go, then closed the door slowly. His hands were shaking. Elijah stood from the bed. Dad, are you okay? David turned, his face tight with controlled emotion. Yeah, buddy, I'm okay. But he wasn't, not really, because he knew this wasn't over. 20 minutes later, David administered Elijah's dose. The boy sat calmly as his father drew the clear liquid into the syringe, measured it precisely, and injected it into the boy's upper arm. All done, David said softly. Elijah nodded. Thanks, Dad. David cleaned up the supplies, resealed the pouch, and placed it back in the mini-fridge. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed and exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. But as he sat there, his phone buzzed. A notification from Maya Torres's social media account. He didn't follow her, but the algorithm had pushed the video to him anyway. The thumbnail showed him standing in the doorway of Suite 914, facing down the crew members. The caption read, Crew's security tries to take Black Father's medication. What happens next will shock you. The video had 1.3 million views. David's stomach dropped. He opened the comments, thousands of them flooding in by the second. This is disgusting. Sue them into oblivion. That man is a hero. Why is this still happening in 2025? Elijah leaned over his father's shoulder. Dad, you're famous. David didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, he just closed the app and set the phone down. Come on, he said. Let's get out of this room. They made their way to the upper deck, seeking fresh air and distance from the tension of the morning. But as they stepped out onto the pool area, something strange happened. People stared, not with suspicion, not with discomfort, with recognition. A woman in her 40s approached cautiously. Excuse me, are you the father from the video? David hesitated. Yes, she smiled, her eyes warm. I just want you to know that what you did was incredible. Standing up for your son like that. You're an inspiration. David blinked, caught off guard. Thank you. Another guest, a man in his 60s, nodded from across the deck. Keep fighting, brother. The world is watching. Elijah looked up at his father, confused. What's happening? I don't know, David admitted. But whatever it was bigger than him now. By noon, the video had reached 4 million views. News outlets were picking it up. Verified accounts were resharing it. The hashtag #DaJustice for Elijah was trending. And aboard the Sea of Roses, the pressure was mounting. Captain Raymond Collier stood in his office, staring at his computer screen. His phone had rung 17 times in the last hour. Corporate, legal, PR, the Maritime Safety Board. Everyone wanted answers, and he had none. Claire Donovan stood across from him, her arms crossed. "I followed protocol, Captain. I did everything by the book." Collier's voice was ice. "The book doesn't account for viral videos, Donovan. The book doesn't account for public outrage. And the book sure as hell doesn't account for the fact that the man you tried to strong-arm is a former federal security consultant with clearance higher than mine." Claire's face went pale. "What?" Collier pulled up a file on his screen and turned it toward her. "David Isaiah Carter, former senior engineer for the Department of Homeland Security, designed biometric systems for federal facilities, including maritime vessels. Consulted on the Sea of Roses security infrastructure during its build phase in 2019. Claire stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. "He designed this ship?" Collier nodded grimly. "And now he's suing us, along with every major civil rights organization in North America." Claire sank into the chair across from him. "I was just trying to protect the passengers." "No," Collier said quietly. "You were trying to control something you didn't understand. And now we're all paying the price." Meanwhile, in a conference room on Deck 3, Rebecca Hollis sat alone, scrolling through her phone. The comments were brutal. "Fire her. She should never work again. This is what racism looks like in 2025. Tears welled in her eyes. She hadn't meant for this to happen. She'd just been doing her job, hadn't she? But as she sat there, replaying the confrontation in her mind, she began to see it differently. The way she'd smiled, the way she'd insisted, the way she'd refused to listen. She'd seen a black man with an unlabeled vial and assumed the worst. She'd seen a child and decided his father couldn't be trusted. And now, the world had seen her. That evening, as the sun set over the Mediterranean, the Sea of Roses made an unscheduled announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Collier. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be making an early return to Barcelona. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your understanding." Passengers murmured in confusion, but David knew. He stood on the balcony of Suite 914, Elijah beside him, and watched as the ship began to turn. "Dad, are we going home?" Elijah asked. David put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yeah, buddy, we are." "Did we do something wrong?" David shook his head. "No, we did something right." As the ship cut through the darkening water, David's phone buzzed one more time. A message from Dr. Vasquez. "I saw the news. Are you both okay?" David typed back. "We're fine. Heading home. Elijah is stable." A pause, then another message. "You just changed the world, David. I hope you know that." David stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at his son, who was leaning against the railing, watching the stars appear one by one. "Hey, E," David said softly. "Yeah, Dad. I'm proud of you." Elijah smiled. "I'm proud of you, too." 6 months later, David stood in a packed conference hall in Washington, D.C. He wore a suit now, and behind him, a massive screen displayed the logo of the newly established Carter Initiative for Medical Passenger Rights. The room was filled with lawmakers, advocates, medical professionals, and journalists. Elijah sat in the front row watching his father with quiet pride. David stepped up to the microphone. 6 months ago, my son and I boarded a cruise ship for what was supposed to be a vacation. Instead, we were profiled, harassed, and nearly lost access to life-saving medication because someone decided we didn't belong." He paused, letting the words settle. "But we didn't just survive that moment. We used it. Today, I'm proud to announce the passage of the Medical Passenger Protection Act, which guarantees federal oversight and protection for travelers carrying critical medications. No more unlabeled fears, no more assumptions, no more discrimination." The room erupted in applause. David glanced at Elijah, who gave him a thumbs up. And for the first time in a long time, David smiled, not because the fight was over, but because he knew they'd won. "What city are you watching from? Drop a comment and let me know. And if this story moved you, don't just watch, share it. Because stories like this don't just need views, they need voices."